The pathway dissolved into dust and stillness. No marker indicated the detour, merely two sagging fence posts, devoid of a gate and a barely discernible trail that disappeared amongst the wilting mesquite. A persistent wind had been present since dawn, and by afternoon the sun appeared muted, veiled by a haze of ochre grit. This was not a locale one happened upon by chance. One had to be thoroughly disoriented to find it. James proceeded at a leisurely pace. He never hurried, never had. His mare, lathered from the extended journey southward, was permitted to set her own rhythm. The saddle creaked, his rifle secured to his back, his canteen swinging at his hip. He had remained silent for 3 full days, even refraining from speaking to his horse. There had been no necessity until he detected a cry. It was not a vocalization of significant volume, but rather a soft, gasping sound, akin to wind trapped within a hollow vessel. Nevertheless, James, still seated in his saddle, inclined his head and paid heed. Another distressed sound followed, then quiet, then 2 faint newborn whimpers, as if caught within the chill of winter's onset. He dismounted, tethered his mare to a bare tree trunk, and advanced through a thicket of desiccated sagebrush and decaying fence planks. The atmosphere carried the scent of rust and pine tar, a fragrance redolent of long-standing neglect. And then he perceived her, a woman secured upright to a splintered post, her arms bound behind her, her garment torn along the sleeve, and dried blood staining her temple. Her countenance was partially obscured by stray tendrils of dark hair, tangled as if they were roots. She offered no gaze in his direction, no movement. Her eyes remained open, as empty as the twilight. At her feet, tightly encased in an aged horse blanket, lay 2 infants, their cheeks rosy, emitting faint, weak cries. Twin girls, no more than a day or 2 old. One of them nursed the fabric's edge, the other blinked languidly, as though the world had already exhausted her. James uttered no words. He knelt. Her lips moved subtly. A dry, rasping sound escaped them. "Do not take them." He unfastened his hunting knife. He moved deliberately. He severed the ropes binding her wrists. Her hands fell, heavy as stones. She swayed momentarily, then succumbed, and he supported her. She was remarkably light, ethereal, composed of little more than bone and silence. He surveyed the incline of the hill. An old homestead stood there, its structure partially collapsed, faint wisps of smoke still emerging from the chimney. No inhabitants were visible presently, yet their presence had been confirmed. The ropes exhibited 2 recent signs of use. James collected the twins first. He placed them within his saddle blanket and carefully draped it across his chest. Then he lifted the woman, his arms supporting her knees and back, and carried her, as if she were a fragile artifact, towards his mare. "You will accompany me," he stated. His voice was not loud but steady, imbued with the weight of a commitment. She offered no response. The return journey was slow. He guided the mare at a walking pace to prevent any disturbance to the infants. The woman's head drooped against his chest once, and he adjusted the blanket more snugly. Snowflakes began to descend once more, drifting lazily, large flakes that adhered to eyelashes and settled into the depths of his collar. By the time they reached the cabin, the sky had seemingly closed in upon itself. The dwelling was modest, comprising a single main chamber with a stove situated in a corner and a cot positioned near the window. James unlatched the door with his boot and carried her inside. The warmth enveloped him like a gentle breath, soft and palpable. The baby's whimpers intensified. One of them flailed its small fists. Recognizing their need, he proceeded with quiet efficiency. He laid the woman on his cot, examining her for any signs of significant bleeding. He discovered more bruising than lacerations. Her ankles were abraded where the rope had chafed. One of her eyes was beginning to swell. Her dress was torn near the neckline, but he averted his gaze. He covered her with a quilt. Subsequently, he intensified the fire, commenced heating water, and retrieved the final portion of goat's milk from a tin. He mixed it with rainwater and warmed it in 2 small glass receptacles. The twins drank with evident eagerness, their tiny mouths working rapidly, their eyelids fluttering shut. Only when they had succumbed to slumber did James allow himself to relax. He did not sleep that night. He remained seated by the fire, observing the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. Her name remained unknown, as did her history, but it held no immediate significance. He recalled the expression on her face when he had discovered her, not fear nor even shame, but a profound resignation, as if she had ceased to anticipate any form of rescue. In the dim light of the approaching dawn, she stirred, emitted a low groan, and turned her head towards the makeshift cradle where the twins now rested, swaddled in his old shirt. Her eyes opened. She observed him. He was crouched nearby, still clad in the attire of the previous day, his hair damp from the snow. She surveyed the room with a gradual awareness, as if awakening into an altered existence. "You did not abandon us," she whispered. He responded with a subtle shake of his head. She attempted to sit up and flinched. Her voice, strained, emerged. "They declared I was not worth sustenance. They said daughters provide no dowry and that I should have perished during childbirth." James offered no spoken reply. He dipped a piece of cloth in warm water and extended it to her. With trembling fingers, she applied it to her cheek. Then she met his gaze directly. "You harbor no apprehension regarding public opinion, taking in a woman such as myself with 2 daughters and no husband." James inclined his head. "You are secure. That is all that is essential." Her eyes softened, though no tears fell, revealing a flicker of incredulity. He did not press for further details, instead standing to tend the fire and arranging bread upon a tin plate. She watched his movements across the room, remarking on his demeanor as that of a man accustomed to solitude, yet unhardened by it. His quietude possessed a gentle quality, reminiscent of falling snow. Outside, a crow emitted a single call and departed. Within, the infant stirred. She grimaced as she straightened her posture, drawing the quilt closer around her shoulders. Her voice, thin, articulated, "My name is Nora." James turned, acknowledging her statement with a nod. She focused on the fire, not on him. "I do not know how to express my gratitude, sir." He glanced away as he responded. James. That was his sole identifier. No surname, no place of origin, simply James. The silence persisted. Then the wind shifted its course, driving the snow against the cabin windows with a sound like hushed entreaties. Nora leaned forward, the quilt pooling in her lap. "You ought to be aware," she stated deliberately. "They will be searching. His family will not countenance your sheltering me." James did not turn. "I place little value on the opinions of individuals of that sort." The fire crackled, sending sparks upward. She observed him intently, as if contemplating a puzzle, and then, with a softness that barely reached his ears, she remarked, "Then I believe I am safe here." James remained immobile, but a subtle tension in his shoulders eased. Later that evening, as she nursed the twins by the firelight, he stepped outside. Snow descended in delicate sheets, brushing his hair and dampening his collar. The expanse of sky above the pines seemed vast and uninhabited, and for the first time in many years, James experienced a sensation. It was not elation nor optimism, but rather a nascent sense of purpose. He glanced back at the light emanating from the cabin window. She was still within. The girls were still breathing, and perhaps, just perhaps, this solitary road was not reaching its conclusion. It was merely embarking on a new trajectory. The fire had not been extinguished once in the 6 days since James had brought her into his refuge. He rose before the sun, adding fuel to the flames in the pale pre-dawn gloom. At dusk, he stirred the glowing embers. Between his duties, he replenished the fire without any prompting. Nora observed this, although he never discussed it, much as she noted his habit of stepping outside whenever she tended to the babies, granting her a privacy that felt almost hallowed. The silence that existed between them was not uncomfortable. It was intentional, as if both intuitively understood that too many words might disrupt the fragile peace. By the close of the initial week, Nora found she could walk without experiencing instability. The bruises on her neck transitioned from a deep purple to a yellowish hue. Her wrist, previously raw from the rope's chafing, now flexed without discomfort. She wore James's spare flannel shirt, its sleeves rolled up, and a skirt she had fashioned from two carefully mended pillowcases. It did not fit perfectly, yet she made no complaint. Her voice, when she spoke, was consistently measured, as if hesitant to expend too much breath. The twins, whom she referred to as her little snowbirds, now slept more soundly, their cheeks gaining a healthier pinkness. Without informing her, James whittled two wooden rattles from discarded pine fragments. He placed them on the windowsill one morning and remained silent. Upon discovering them, Nora's hand hovered over the delicate floral carvings on the handles. Her mouth parted slightly, suggesting the verge of tears, but she did not weep. She carefully placed the rattles in the cradle and returned to folding fabric. This was their unspoken communication, conveyed through actions. Each day, James departed before noon, always returning by nightfall. He would bring back provisions, firewood, or necessary items procured from town. Nora never inquired about his activities, presuming they involved manual labor or perhaps some form of commerce, yet inwardly she suspected he was discreetly safeguarding their presence, shielding them. The town had not yet made its inquiries. However, an encroaching silence possessed the capacity to accumulate, much like the gathering of storm clouds. One morning, she ventured to ask if he required assistance with any task. He did not respond immediately, simply regarding her with that prolonged, steady gaze he reserved for situations he found perplexing. Then he handed her a pail and gestured towards the well. A smile, the first in days, graced her lips. The weight of the pail provided a sense of grounding. Her physical strength was still recovering, but her steps gained a firmer resolve. Outside, the air carried the scent of thawing snow and pine. Ravens glided low amongst the branches, their flight silent, yet imbued with a palpable gravity. Nora filled the pail, spilling a small amount onto her skirt. She paid it no mind. As she turned to retrace her steps, she observed Mrs. Evelyn Parrish standing near the roadside, accompanied by a mule and an expression brimming with curiosity. Evelyn epitomized the kind of widow who believed her mere presence constituted a benevolent act. She possessed sharp, observant eyes, lips thinned by age, and a bonnet she never removed, irrespective of the weather. Her mule was adorned with a vibrant red blanket, meticulously embroidered with her initials. She invariably presented jam during her visits, though its flavor leaned more towards vinegar than fruit. "Well," Evelyn declared, her gaze lingering on the infant's garments drying on the porch line, "you appear remarkably spry for someone interred by her husband's relatives." Nora tightened her grip on the pail. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Is James within?" Nora nodded. Evelyn advanced closer. Her voice dropped, creating ripples like a stone cast into a tranquil pond. "Folks are circulating rumors in Mississippi about him keeping you here with two unnamed children." Nora met her gaze steadily. "My name is Nora." Evelyn emitted a disdainful sniff. "A name carries little weight without a ring on your finger, my dear." She turned towards the house, a smirk contorting her features sharply. "Inform James that the first delivery of more flour has arrived. He may have needed it, considering he was now responsible for 3 hungry mouths." With that thought, she mounted her sturdy mule and set off at a leisurely, unhurried pace, leaving Nora with the lingering burn of shame coloring her ears. Moments later, James emerged, having observed the scene through the cabin window. He offered no words, simply accepting the bucket from her and carrying it inside. That night, long after the twin infants had finally succumbed to sleep, Nora remained awake. She neither sewed nor swayed in the rocking chair. Instead, she simply gazed into the flickering flames while James meticulously repaired the cabin door's stubborn hinge. Eventually, she broke the silence. "They'll never let me forget I'm not truly welcome here." James continued his work without pause. "You are welcome here." Nora shook her head, a gesture of quiet despair. "Not here, not in this settlement, not anywhere." He paused his task and gently placed the hinge onto the table. "I don't answer to settlements." Her hands, resting in her lap, tightened into fists. "You have no idea what it's like to be treated as if you're contaminated simply because you've given birth to daughters, like you're an unwanted burden, a mouth no one wishes to feed, wrapped in skin." James looked at her, his gaze steady. Then, in a voice measured with profound stillness, he replied, "I understand what it means to be so isolated for so long that you forget your own name." Nora looked up at him. "I know what it's like for people to interpret your quietude as defiance," he continued, "to be scrutinized as if you're an unanswered question." The fire crackled between them, a gentle counterpoint to their words. "I've never had to nurture young ones," he admitted, gesturing towards the wooden cradle with a nod. "But I can recognize that they are not omens of ill fortune, nor—" His eyes met hers, a flicker of something deep within them. James reached into his coat pocket and slid a small glass jar across the table towards her. It contained sweet cream procured from town. "I overheard you mention you missed it," he said softly. Nora pressed her lips together, her eyes betraying no tears, only a single quiet nod as she accepted the jar, cradling it in both hands as if it were a sacred relic. The following morning she discovered him outside, diligently hammering posts to secure the fence line. Without a word, she fetched him a pail of water and then remained beside him, handing him nails as needed. They worked in companionable silence, side by side, against the chill wind. Though he spoke no more, Nora felt a palpable shift in their connection, as if the invisible tether anchoring her spirit to the world had found a new secure mooring. One afternoon, she found a book placed on the mantelpiece, a small, well-worn volume of Psalms. Inscribed inside the cover, in faded ink, were the words, "To James from your mother, for when silence becomes heavy." Nora gently turned a few pages, observing that certain verses were underlined, with penciled notes filling the margins. The pages carried the faint scent of pine and aged dust. James entered the cabin behind her. "I didn't realize you frequented scripture," she murmured. "Only the passages that resonate like melodies." A faint smile touched her lips. That evening, the wind intensified, disturbing the infant's slumber. One began to cry, its tiny voice growing hoarse. Without any prompting, James gathered the child into his arms and began to pace the cabin floor, whispering words Nora could not discern. Eventually, both daughters quieted and slept once more. As he turned to face Nora, his gaze seemed to truly see her for the first time, as if the emotional scars were finally beginning to mend alongside any physical ones. He offered no further words, merely a subtle nod before returning to his customary spot by the fire. She sat opposite him, the firelight casting dancing shadows in her eyes. A silence settled between them, but it was a silence transformed, no longer one of apprehension, but rather the quietude of something nascent and hopeful, still unnamed. Within that peaceful stillness, Nora found herself breathing with greater ease. Her hands, when she reached for the cradle, no longer trembled. For the first time in years, she felt not as though she were merely existing in the periphery of someone else's life, but as if she were actively cultivating something here, something unspoken, yet undeniably real. James observed her from his place across the room, his expression serene, as if patiently awaiting her own unfettered return to herself. Outside, snowflakes swirled against the window panes, but within the cabin, the fire burned steadily, and the silence radiated a comforting warmth. The season itself seemed to shift in hushed tones. Winter's grip gradually relented, not with dramatic pronouncements, but through subtle indications. The distant melody of a returning bird, the steady drip of melting ice from the roof's edge, the faint, awakening aroma of pine needles beneath the thawing earth. The cabin, once heavily blanketed in snow, now bore patches of exposed ground, like scattered freckles upon its frame. Life was tentatively re-emerging, slow and hesitant, akin to a weary traveler returning home after a long period of displacement. Inside, the girls grew progressively stronger. They began to babble, their small mouths shaping sounds that, while not yet discernible words, conveyed a clear sense of intention. Nora's days unfolded in a rhythm of rocking feeding, folding laundry, and soft humming. Her hands had gained a newfound steadiness, her movements a quiet confidence. She wore her hair differently now, loosely bound with the faded ribbon James had procured from town. A healthy colour had returned to her cheeks, and her smiles held a lingering warmth. James had begun to fashion objects from wood. Initially, these were small wooden effigies for the infants, bears, rabbits, and a horse with a slightly askew tail. Then, one morning, Nora noticed him seated on the porch, skillfully shaping a larger, more intricate piece. It was a cradle, designed with exceptional care, its corners smoothed to perfection, its interior subtly marked with small notches, perhaps tallying the days of her presence. He presented it to her one evening without a word, placing it beside the hearth. Nora gently ran her hand over its surface, marveling at the tangible evidence of his effort. He never inquired if she approved, nor did she offer explicit thanks. Some expressions of gratitude transcend the need for spoken words. Then 3 riders appeared on the trail leading towards the cabin. Nora spotted them first from the kitchen window, a dish rag clutched in her hands. 3 figures on horseback, their forms softened by the morning mist. One wore a familiar brown coat, her brother-in-law, Matthew. The others were cousins, individuals with rough hands, hardened gazes, and rifles slung across their shoulders. She let the dish rag fall. Her hands began to tremble. The twins stirred in their cradle. Before the riders reached the gate, James stepped onto the porch. He did not reach for his rifle, but instead leaned casually against a post, his arms crossed. The men halted approximately 10 paces away. Matthew spat onto the ground. "That woman inside is family, and those children carry our blood." James remained unmoving. "That is true." Matthew's jaw tightened. "We mean no confrontation. We have simply come to reclaim what belongs to us." James's voice was as calm as the morning frost. "She does not belong to you. She is not an object to be claimed." "She was married to my brother," Matthew growled, his voice thick with resentment, "and those brats bear his surname." "Then your brother should have remained alive," James retorted. A pregnant silence followed. One of the cousins shifted uneasily in his saddle. The other subtly cocked the hammer of his rifle. "I would prefer this situation not escalate into violence," Matthew warned. James met his gaze with the same quiet composure that Nora had come to recognize. "Nor would I." Another pause. Then James straightened himself from the post and began to walk towards them. He carried no weapon, displayed no overt anger, but his steps carried an undeniable weight of purpose. "You will ride down this hill now," he stated softly, "or I will have 3 more men to bury before supper time." The wind blew with a thin, dry rasp. Matthew hesitated, glancing towards the cabin window, where he saw Nora watching him, her lips curled in a look of disdain. "She is not worth the trouble, rancher. Women of her kind only ruin good men." James did not flinch. "She possesses more womanhood than you will ever have, man." That pronouncement proved to be the breaking point. Matthew yanked the reins of his horse, turning it sharply. The cousins followed suit, their figures gradually dissolving into the encroaching mist and trees. James watched their departure, then returned to the porch, standing in silent contemplation for a long moment before finally stepping back inside. Nora remained by the window, her breath fogging the glass. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, as if bracing herself against an unseen force. "I did not ask you to intervene on my behalf," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I did not do this for you." She turned, startled as he looked at her, his expression steady and kind. "I did it because no one should ever be compelled to beg for the simple right to be left in peace." She swallowed, her voice catching. "They will return. I am aware of that. And next time they will bring reinforcements." Nora nodded, then fell silent. That night, sleep eluded her. She sat in the rocking chair long after the twins had drifted back into slumber, her fingers restlessly twisting the hem of her dress. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had shifted its direction. James sat on the floor near the hearth, methodically sharpening a blade. "I don't truly belong anywhere," she confessed quietly. "You belong here." Nora looked down, her gaze fixed on her hands. "I have never felt I belonged anywhere," she whispered. "Not with my husband, not in his family's home. I was merely a vessel for marriage, a means to bear children. Nothing more." James rose and walked to the stove, pouring warm water into her waiting cup. "You are not a mere thing," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You are a person." She accepted the cup with trembling hands, took a small sip, and closed her eyes. "I am so tired of constantly fleeing." "Then cease." His voice was so simple, so assured, it felt like a fundamental truth the earth had always known. "I don't know how." He crouched beside her, one knee on the floor, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the cradle. "You stay. That's how—" Her breath hitched, then she slowly turned to face him. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with a deeper, more primal emotion, a yearning that had no name. James did not reach for her. He simply remained beside her, as steadfast and grounded as the earth itself. She tentatively touched his hand. Their fingers did not entwine, merely brushed against each other, yet the sheer weight of that simple contact seemed to steal the air from her lungs. For the first time since her marriage, since her husband's passing, since the fading remnants of rope burns on her wrists, she felt truly seen, undeniably, silently, completely seen. She looked down at his hand, calloused and unmoving. "I am not ready," she whispered. "I know, and you may never be. I will still be here." She looked up at him. "Why?" He stood and returned to the hearth, then replied softly, "Because you chose to remain when you had the option to leave." She found herself without words, so she offered none. In the ensuing days, James made no mention of the confrontation with her brother-in-law and cousins. He did, however, install additional locks on the rear window, reinforce the porch supports, and clean his rifle with unusual frequency. He also constructed a secure play area for the girls and presented Nora with a spool of vibrant yellow thread for her sewing. She understood his actions implicitly. He was not merely fortifying the cabin, but safeguarding the burgeoning life that had taken root within its walls. One evening, she watched him through the window as he worked on mending the fence gate once more. The twins played contentedly beside her. The world was hushed, the sky a deep, bruised purple. He looked up once, catching her gaze. Nora did not look away, and in that prolonged, profound exchange, spanning the distance between glass, wind, and a vast expanse of unspoken understanding, something significant passed between them. This was not a pledge, not yet, but an inception, one that would extend into spring and transform all. The wind had shifted. It no longer shrieked at the eaves like a damaged creature. It whispered, gentle and low, as if the earth itself was finding repose. The thaw had infiltrated subtly, liberating ice from the fir boughs, coaxing verdure from beneath the dormant grass. The world was realigning, and so was she. Nora stood on the veranda, unshocked, with an infant on each hip, her gaze drawn to the ascending sun, much like a navigational instrument locating its origin. She couldn't pinpoint precisely when the rustic dwelling had ceased to feel like a sanctuary for concealment and had begun to feel like a place where she was establishing foundations. Perhaps it was the crib James had fashioned, or the way the floorboards radiated warmth in the morning illumination. Perhaps it was how he referred to the youngsters as diminutive thistles, resilient beings that weathered tempests. Or possibly it was the manner in which he never once requested anything in return. Not a favour, not a future, solely whether she desired to remain. That morning she heard the summons, not at the cabin entrance, but at the citadel of her spirit. A missive had arrived, conveyed by a ruddy-complexioned clerk astride a recalcitrant ass, a relative from her maternal lineage. One of the sparse familial threads that hadn't dissolved like mist had extended an invitation to a dwelling, a residence, a caregiver, a claim to patrimony from an obscure paternal inheritance, solace, a chamber exclusively her own, a novel appellation for the girls, a fresh commencement untethered from James. She clutched the document between her digits as though it might ignite. James exhibited no outward reaction when she presented it. He merely perused it once, folded it, and returned it with a subtle inclination of his head. His eyes did not waver, though they became more subdued than usual. He did not entreat her to remain, nor did he utter her name. He simply stepped beyond the threshold and commenced to harness her steed. By midday her satchel was prepared. She seated herself with it on the porch adjacent to the crib, observing the sun striping the trees. The children played beside her. One thumb nestled in her mouth, the other formed a clenched fist as if poised to strike the world. James emerged from the stable and placed a bundle beside her. Cheese, loaves, water, an extra woolen covering. He did not sit. He simply nodded again. "You shall fare well," he stated. She blinked placidly. "And yourself?" He gestured towards the distant escarpment. "I was well prior." She winced, not at the pronouncement, but at the tenderness he still managed to imbue within it. "You do not intend to impede me?" He inclined his head once. "It was never within my purview." She lowered her gaze to the infants. "They find contentment here. They shall be content wherever you are." She rose, uncertain of how her limbs responded. Each movement felt weightier, as if her skeletal structure possessed knowledge her heart had not yet assimilated. At the veranda's edge, she turned back. "Do you wish for my departure?" He met her gaze, and in this instance something fractured within his countenance. Not frailty, merely candour. "I desire your continuance," he declared, "but only if it aligns with your volition." Her throat constricted. "And should I shall construct for you a life," he murmured, "a tranquil existence, one that does not necessitate your enduring." Her knees nearly buckled. James surveyed the youngsters. "You possess daughters who require a guardian who will watch over them akin to the dawn and the evening repast, and I have hands that have accomplished nothing of worth until you directed their purpose." She emitted a tearful chuckle. He advanced towards her. Then, for the inaugural occasion, not with placidity, but with a fervent glow in his breast, the kind that does not consume, it nurtures. "I am without a token of commitment," he stated, "but I possess a domicile that acknowledges your designation and a hearth that awaits your ministrations. That is my offering." She released her satchel. The sound was subdued, yet definitive. Then her features contorted, not in grief, but in acquiescence to optimism, to security, to him. And when James extended his hand, she did not recoil. She stepped into his embrace as a woman finally convinced she merited her presence there. He held her as she had never been held, not tightly, but expansively, present as if he were making room for every facet of her being, the shattered fragments, the robust elements, the portions still learning to inhale. The children stirred in the crib, gazing up at their surroundings with the wide-eyed innocence of youngsters unaware that people depart. But this time no one departed. The marital ceremony transpired 3 days hence. Mrs. Eve Parish arrived, partly in dissent, partly in intrigue. She bore pickled beets and an expression that conveyed, "I foretold this," despite having made no such prognostication. The clergyman was aged and hard of hearing. He prompted Nora to articulate more loudly on 2 occasions, which she did with a quavering voice that finally grasped the import of a vow. James offered no ornate pronouncements, merely regarded her as if she were the sole remaining verity, and softly declared, "I elect you." Each day, even the arduous ones, they exchanged kisses. The children chirped with delight. The pine trees inclined slightly in the zephyr. That evening, they reclined on the porch beneath a star-strewn firmament. James had removed his footwear and rested his back against the railing, his limbs extended, his hands clasped behind his head. Nora sat cross-legged beside him, one infant slumbering in her lap, the other nestled at her feet. A considerable interval elapsed in silence. Then James remarked, "You never articulated your aspirations, not a solitary instance." She turned her head. "That is because no one ever inquired. I am a mere husk now." She smiled. "I desire days devoid of clamour. I desire bread that ascends and daughters who do not learn to diminish. I desire a man who does not compel me to earn security." He nodded assent. "Then that is what we shall construct." She rested her head upon his shoulder. The hearth within the cabin emitted a faint but constant glow. Somewhere distant, a coyote's cry was met with no response. Here, in this modest precinct of an expansive and solitary existence, the stillness no longer harboured sorrow. Only tranquility, only warmth, only the gentle respiration of 2 daughters, beside 2 individuals who had at last discovered that which they had hesitated to implore, a dwelling that endured. Before you depart, inform me, from where in this vast ancient world do you observe? Submit your city or country in the commentary section. I am eager to ascertain the reach of these Wild West narratives, and if this account of quiet fortitude and second opportunities has resonated with you, offer a sentiment for Nora, or for the archetype of a man who requires no fanfare to be significant.